Commander Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the massive warship Terran Defiance, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger as they approached. After 15 years fighting the hegemony across 17 different star systems, she was finally coming home. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman who had faced down alien armadas and stood toe-to-toe with creatures that could tear through steel with their bare claws was now nervous about something as simple as returning to civilian life. The war was over. Humanity had won, though the cost had been terrible. Sarah's tactical brilliance had turned the tide in the final battle at Proxima Station, where her unconventional strategies had confused and ultimately defeated the hegemony's supposedly superior forces. The aliens had expected humans to fight like every other species they'd conquered, with predictable patterns and honor-bound tactics. Instead, Sarah had shown them what human creativity and stubborn refusal to surrender could accomplish. Now, at 33, she found herself holding a discharge paper and staring at a planet that felt more foreign to her than the alien world she'd fought on. Earth had changed during the war years. Cities had been rebuilt with alien technology recovered from battlefields. Society had adapted to the reality that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. And Sarah? She had no idea how to fit into this new world. The transport shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, passing over sprawling cities that mixed familiar human architecture with sleek alien designs. Sarah's enhanced hearing, a result of military augmentations, picked up the nervous chatter of other returning veterans. Most of them were younger, barely out of their teens when the war started. They talked excitedly about seeing family again, about picking up lives they'd left behind. Sarah envied them. She had no family waiting for her, no old life to return to. Her parents had died in the first hegemony attack on Earth, and she'd spent her entire adult life in the military. The shuttle landed at New Geneva Spaceport, a massive complex that hadn't existed when Sarah left Earth. As she walked through the terminal, carrying only a single duffel bag containing everything she owned, she noticed how people looked at her. Her military bearing was unmistakable, and the service ribbons on her civilian jacket told a story that made others step aside respectfully. She was a war hero, they whispered, one of the famous ones who'd saved humanity. But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt lost. The integration counselor at the Veterans Affairs Office was a kind woman named Dr. Martinez, who specialized in helping combat veterans adjust to civilian life. She reviewed Sarah's file with barely concealed amazement. Commander Chen had served on 12 different worlds, fought in 37 major engagements, and held more decorations than most career officers accumulated in a lifetime. Her tactical innovations were now taught at military academies across human space. "You're still young, Commander," Dr. Martinez said gently. "You have your whole life ahead of you. What interests you? What did you want to do before the war?" Sarah almost laughed at the question. Before the war, she'd been 17 and planning to study engineering at university. That girl felt like someone else entirely, someone who died in the fires of the first alien attack. She'd never had a chance to develop civilian interests or hobbies. Her entire identity was built around being a soldier. "I don't know," she admitted, the words feeling strange in her mouth. Commander Chen always knew what to do, always had a plan. But sitting in this comfortable office on a peaceful Earth, she felt more uncertain than she had facing down an alien battlecruiser. Dr. Martinez suggested various programs, college courses, job training, therapy groups for veterans. Sarah nodded and took the pamphlets, but nothing felt right. How could she explain that she'd once held the fate of human civilization in her hands? And now the thought of choosing between different breakfast cereals at the grocery store felt overwhelming. The apartment the government provided was small but comfortable, located in a quiet district of New Seattle. Sarah stood in the living room, surrounded by bland furniture and generic decorations, and felt the walls closing in. The silence was the worst part. After years of constant noise, ship engines, weapons fire, shouted orders, the quiet felt oppressive and wrong. She tried to sleep that first night but found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Every small sound made her reach for weapons that weren't there. When a neighbor's cat knocked over a trash can in the alley, Sarah was on her feet and ready for combat before her conscious mind caught up with her reflexes. This wasn't going to work. The next morning, Dr. Martinez called with an unusual suggestion. The local high school, Jefferson High, was looking for someone to teach a new class called Galactic History and Xenobiology. It was part of the updated curriculum designed to prepare students for humanity's new role in the galaxy. They needed someone with real experience, someone who'd actually been out there among the stars. A teacher? Sarah asked, incredulous. I've never taught anything except how to kill aliens efficiently. Think about it, Dr. Martinez encouraged. You have knowledge that no textbook can provide, and working with young people might give you a sense of purpose again. Sarah hung up the phone and walked to her window, looking out at the busy street below. People were going about their daily lives, completely unaware that the woman watching them had once faced down a hegemony dreadnought, with nothing but a damaged frigate and pure human stubbornness. They were living the life she'd fought to protect, and somehow that felt both meaningful and completely alien to her. Maybe teaching wouldn't be so different from commanding troops. Both involved taking a group of people and helping them reach their potential. Both required patience, strategy, and the ability to adapt when things didn't go according to plan. And if she was being honest with herself, Sarah missed having a mission, a purpose beyond just existing. She picked up the phone and called Dr. Martinez back. Tell them I'm interested in the teaching position. But I should warn them. I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to teenagers. Dr. Martinez's warm laugh came through the speaker. Commander, you fought wars across 17 star systems and lived to tell about it. I think you can handle a classroom full of 17-year-olds. Sarah wasn't entirely convinced, but for the first time since returning to Earth, she felt a spark of something that might have been hope. Maybe this strange new world had a place for an old soldier after all. Jefferson High School looked nothing like the school Sarah remembered from her own brief time as a student. The building incorporated salvaged hegemony materials into its structure, creating an interesting blend of human and alien architecture. Crystalline panels that had once been part of enemy ships now served as windows, their surfaces automatically adjusting their opacity based on the sun's position. It was beautiful in its own way, a symbol of how humanity had taken the tools of their would-be conquerors and turned them toward peaceful purposes. Principal Williams greeted Sarah in the main office with obvious nervousness. He was a small man in his 50s who kept adjusting his glasses as he spoke. Sarah realized she was probably the most dangerous person he'd ever met, and her military bearing wasn't helping him relax. She made a conscious effort to soften her posture and speak more gently. We're honored to have you here, Commander Chen, he said, leading her through corridors filled with students. I have to admit, when the district suggested we recruit an actual war veteran to teach the new Galactic Studies program, I wasn't sure what to expect. Your credentials are quite impressive. Sarah watched the teenagers in the hallways and felt a familiar tactical assessment mode kick in. These kids had grown up during the war years, but most were too young to remember the worst of it. They moved with the casual confidence of people who'd never faced real danger, chattering about homework and social plans and all the normal concerns of adolescence. It was exactly what she'd fought to preserve, yet it felt completely foreign to her. I should warn you, she told Principal Williams. I've never actually taught before. My experience with education mostly involves teaching soldiers how not to die in combat. Principal Williams paused at a classroom door and gave her what was probably meant to be an encouraging smile. Well, classroom management shouldn't be too difficult for someone who's commanded troops in battle, right? Sarah wasn't so sure about that assumption, but she followed him into the empty classroom that would be hers. It was larger than she'd expected, with desks arranged in neat rows facing a smartboard that could display holographic images. Along one wall were display cases waiting to be filled with artifacts and specimens. She noticed that the windows offered a clear view of the school's courtyard, where students gathered during breaks. Good sight lines, multiple exits, defensible position. She caught herself thinking tactically again and forced those thoughts away. Your first class starts in an hour, Principal Williams explained, handing her a tablet with the day's schedule. You'll have 5 sections of galactic history and xenobiology, with about 25 students each. The curriculum is flexible since this is the first year we're offering the course. The district basically wants you to share your knowledge however you see fit. After he left, Sarah stood alone in her new classroom trying to process the magnitude of what she'd gotten herself into. 125 teenagers expecting her to teach them about the galaxy beyond Earth. She'd faced down alien war machines that could level cities. But the thought of standing in front of a classroom full of adolescents was genuinely intimidating. The first students began filing in 20 minutes before class officially started, their conversations filling the previously quiet room with noise and energy. Sarah positioned herself behind the desk at the front of the room and watched them settle into their seats. They were a diverse group, representing the mixing of cultures that had occurred during the war years when refugees from attacked colonies had been relocated to Earth. A girl with bright purple hair and multiple piercings chose a seat in the front row and stared at Sarah with undisguised curiosity. A tall boy who looked like he played sports sat in the back corner, clearly trying to project an image of cool disinterest. Scattered throughout the room were students of various backgrounds, all carrying the standard tablets and personal devices that modern education required. As the official start time approached, the conversations gradually died down and all eyes turned to Sarah. She realized they were waiting for her to begin, to prove that she belonged in this role. Her mouth felt dry, and for a moment she envied the simplicity of her old job. Enemy ships were straightforward. You either destroyed them or they destroyed you. Teenagers were far more complex and unpredictable. "I'm Sarah Chen," she began, her voice carrying easily through the room despite her nervousness. "I suppose you're expecting me to tell you about my military service and all the exciting battles I fought during the war." Several students leaned forward eagerly, and Sarah realized that was exactly what they were hoping for. War stories, tales of heroic combat against alien monsters. She could see the disappointment in some faces when she continued. "But that's not what this class is about. Yes, I fought in the war against the hegemony. Yes, I saw things and did things that I hope none of you will ever have to experience. But the galaxy is much more than just conflict and warfare. There are hundreds of species out there, each with their own cultures, technologies, and ways of understanding the universe. That's what we're going to explore together." A hand shot up in the middle of the room. Sarah nodded at the student, a nervous-looking boy with thick glasses. "Is it true that you once destroyed an entire hegemony fleet by yourself?" he asked breathlessly. Sarah sighed internally. This was what she'd been afraid of, becoming some kind of celebrity figure rather than an actual teacher. "I never fought alone," she said firmly. "Every victory was achieved by working with other people, human and alien alike. The idea of the lone hero winning battles single-handedly is a myth that gets people killed in real combat." She moved away from behind the desk, beginning to pace as she found her rhythm. "The most important lesson I learned during the war wasn't about tactics or weapons. It was about understanding that every species thinks differently, and those differences can be either weaknesses to exploit or strengths to learn from. The hegemony made the mistake of assuming all other species would think and act like them. We won because we didn't make that same error." The students were listening now, not with the disappointed attention of people who'd been denied exciting stories, but with genuine interest. Sarah felt something click into place, a sense that maybe she could do this after all. "So let's start with a question," she continued. "How many of you have actually met someone from another species?" About half the hands in the room went up, which was more than Sarah had expected. The post-war world really had changed dramatically. "Excellent. I want each of you to think about that interaction. What surprised you about them? How were they different from what you expected? How were they similar to humans?" She paused, looking around the room, because understanding other species isn't just academic knowledge anymore. It's a practical skill you'll need as humanity takes its place in the galactic community. The purple-haired girl in the front row raised her hand. "Ms. Chen, what was the scariest alien you ever fought against?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The scariest ones weren't the physically dangerous ones. The most frightening enemies were the ones who thought so differently from humans that I couldn't predict what they'd do next. Fear comes from the unknown, and the galaxy is full of minds that work in ways we've never imagined. She walked over to the display cases along the wall, already formulating plans for what specimens and artifacts she could obtain to make her lessons more engaging. But here's the thing about fear. Once you understand something, it becomes less frightening and more fascinating. By the end of this course, I want you to be excited about the diversity of life in the galaxy, not afraid of it. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and students began gathering their belongings. As they filed out, Sarah heard fragments of conversation that made her smile. They were already discussing the questions she'd posed, debating their own experiences with non-human species. The purple-haired girl lingered behind as the classroom emptied. "That was really cool," she said. I thought this was going to be another boring history class, but it sounds like we're actually going to learn useful stuff." After the student left, Sarah stood alone in her classroom again, but this time the space felt different, less foreign, more like somewhere she might actually belong. She had 4 more classes to get through today, and then the real work would begin, designing a curriculum that could prepare these young people for a galaxy full of wonders and dangers that most humans had never imagined. For the first time since returning to Earth, Sarah felt like she might have found her new mission. 3 weeks into the school year, Sarah had settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Her military training had given her skills that translated well to teaching. The ability to plan and execute complex operations, to adapt quickly when things didn't go according to plan, and to maintain authority while still connecting with the people under her command. Because that's what her students were, she realized. Not soldiers, but people she was responsible for preparing for the challenges ahead. The real test came on a Tuesday morning when she arrived at school to find Principal Williams waiting outside her classroom with a concerned expression. Behind him stood 2 people Sarah didn't recognize, a woman in an expensive business suit and a man wearing the uniform of the Earth Defense Force. "Commander Chen," Principal Williams began nervously, "this is Director Sarah Watson from the Department of Education and Colonel Marcus Reed from EDF Command. They'd like to observe your class today." Sarah's enhanced senses picked up the subtle signs of tension in all 3 visitors. The bureaucrat was trying to look professional but couldn't hide her skepticism. The colonel was assessing Sarah the way one military officer evaluates another, looking for weaknesses, testing for competence. Principal Williams was simply worried about what this unexpected inspection might mean for his school. "Of course," Sarah replied calmly, "though I should warn you, today's lesson involves some hands-on activities that might seem unconventional." Director Watson consulted her tablet. "We're particularly interested in seeing how you're adapting military experience for civilian education. There have been some concerns raised about the appropriateness of having active combat veterans teaching children." Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but kept her voice level. "I see. Well, you're welcome to observe and judge for yourselves." The first class of the day was her most challenging group, 26 students including several who had been labeled as difficult by their previous teachers. As the teenagers filed in, Sarah noticed them eyeing the adult visitors with the mixture of curiosity and suspicion that adolescents reserved for authority figures. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, moving to the center of the room rather than hiding behind her desk. "Before we start today's lesson, I want you to meet some visitors who are here to observe our class. Director Watson from the Department of Education and Colonel Reed from Earth Defense Force." A hand shot up immediately. It was Marcus, the tall student who usually sat in the back and maintained an air of cool detachment. "Are we in trouble or something?"
"Why are they here?"
Sarah appreciated his directness. "They're here to evaluate whether I'm doing a good job as your teacher. So I guess that means you'll all have to help me look competent today." The students laughed, and Sarah noticed Director Watson making notes on her tablet with a slight frown. Apparently, casual humor wasn't what she'd expected from a military instructor. "Today we're going to practice something called diplomatic first contact," Sarah announced, pulling up a holographic display that showed the image of an alien creature. "This is a Zilari trader, a species humanity first encountered 6 months ago. They're peaceful, but they have very different social customs from ours. Your assignment is to work in groups and figure out how to establish successful communication and trade relations." She divided the class into teams and handed each group a tablet containing different pieces of information about Zilari culture, biology, and technology. Some groups got details about their complex hierarchical society. Others learned about their unique sensory capabilities, and still others discovered information about their religious beliefs and taboos. "Here's the catch," Sarah continued. "Just like in real first contact situations, no one group has all the information. You'll need to share what you've learned and work together to develop a comprehensive strategy. You have 30 minutes to prepare, and then each team will present their approach." As the students dove into their work, Sarah noticed the observers watching with varying degrees of interest. Colonel Reed seemed intrigued by the exercise's practical applications, while Director Watson appeared concerned about something she couldn't quite identify. The energy in the room was electric as the teams discovered how their different pieces of information connected. The group that had learned about Zalari sensory capabilities realized why certain gestures mentioned by another team were considered offensive. The team studying their technology understood why the economic information held by their classmates was so important. When presentation time came, Sarah was impressed by the creativity and thoughtfulness of their solutions. One group had developed a complex ritual for initial contact that took into account the aliens' hierarchical nature. Another had identified potential trade goods that would be valuable to both species without violating cultural taboos. A third group had created a communication protocol that accounted for the Zalari's enhanced hearing and different vocal ranges. "Excellent work, all of you," Sarah said as the presentations concluded. "Now, here's what I want you to think about. This exercise is based on a real situation. Humanity's first diplomatic mission to the Zalari homeworld is happening next month, and the negotiation strategies you've just developed are remarkably similar to what our actual diplomats are planning to use." The students sat up straighter, suddenly realizing that their classroom exercise had real-world relevance. Marcus raised his hand again. "Are you saying we could actually influence what happens in real diplomatic missions?" "I'm saying that the thinking skills you're developing in this class, the ability to understand different perspectives, to synthesize incomplete information, to work as a team under pressure, these are exactly the skills that humanity needs as we expand into the galaxy. Every one of you has the potential to become explorers, diplomats, or leaders in humanity's galactic future." Director Watson had stopped taking notes and was staring at Sarah with an unreadable expression. Colonel Reed was nodding slightly, apparently approving of what he'd witnessed. After the class ended and the students filed out chattering excitedly about their diplomatic strategies, the three observers approached Sarah's desk. Director Watson spoke first, her tone noticeably different from when she'd arrived. "That was not what I expected," she admitted. "When we received reports about a military instructor teaching unconventional lessons, I was concerned about inappropriate content and teaching methods. Instead, I saw students engaging with complex material in ways that most traditional educators struggle to achieve." Colonel Reed stepped forward. "Commander Chen, I've seen a lot of training exercises in my career, but that was impressive. You managed to teach strategic thinking, cultural awareness, teamwork, and practical problem-solving all in a single lesson, and the students were completely engaged throughout." Sarah felt a surge of pride, followed immediately by a familiar wariness. "I sense there's a but coming." "Not a but," Director Watson said. How? How are you achieving these results? Your students' test scores have improved dramatically since the semester began, and their engagement levels are off the charts. Other teachers want to know what you're doing differently." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I treat them like they're capable of handling important responsibilities. I give them real problems to solve instead of abstract theories to memorize. And I trust them to rise to the occasion when I set high expectations. It's the same principle that works in military units," Colonel Reed added. "People perform better when they believe their work matters and when they're given responsibility, rather than just orders." Principal Williams, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. "Does this mean we can continue with the program as planned?" Director Watson nodded. "More than that. We'd like to expand it. Commander Chen, would you be interested in developing a curriculum that could be implemented in schools across the Earth Alliance? We need more educators who can prepare students for the realities of our galactic future." Sarah looked out the window at her students in the courtyard below. They were still discussing the day's lesson, gesturing animatedly as they debated different approaches to alien diplomacy. 3 weeks ago, most of them had seen other species as exotic curiosities at best, potential threats at worst. Now they were thinking like future ambassadors and explorers. "I'll consider it," she said, "but I want to finish what I've started here first. These students deserve to see their potential fully realized." As the observers left, Sarah remained in her empty classroom, reflecting on how much had changed since that first terrifying day. She was still a soldier at heart, but her battlefield had shifted from the void between stars to the minds of young people, and for the first time since the war ended, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The real test of Sarah's new calling came 2 months later, when Jefferson High School was selected to participate in a pilot program that would change everything. The Galactic Education Initiative was an ambitious project, designed to foster understanding between species through student exchange programs. Sarah's success with her xenobiology classes had caught the attention of the Interspecies Council, and they wanted to use her school as a testing ground. The announcement came during a faculty meeting that Sarah almost skipped. She'd grown comfortable with her routine and wasn't particularly interested in administrative discussions about budget allocations and standardized testing. But Principal Williams had specifically requested her attendance, so she sat in the back of the room, only half listening until the words alien exchange students grabbed her full attention. The program would bring 12 students from different allied species to Jefferson High for a full semester. Principal Williams explained to the assembled teachers. In return, 12 of our students would spend time studying on their home worlds. The Interspecies Council has chosen our school because of the innovative work being done in our Galactic Studies program. Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Some of her colleagues looked excited by the prospect. Others appeared worried, and a few seemed downright terrified. Teaching human teenagers was challenging enough. The idea of adding alien adolescents to the mix was daunting even for experienced educators. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, who taught traditional history, raised her hand nervously. What kind of support will we have? I mean, I don't know anything about alien psychology or cultural sensitivity training. That's where Commander Chen comes in, Principal Williams said, gesturing towards Sarah. She'll be serving as the program coordinator and cultural liaison. All participating teachers will receive intensive training on interspecies communication and classroom management. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. This was bigger than anything she'd tackled since returning to civilian life, and the stakes were enormous. If the pilot program succeeded, it could revolutionize education throughout human space. If it failed, it might set back interspecies relations for years. After the meeting, Principal Williams approached her with a thick folder of documents. I know this is a lot to ask, Sarah. You've already done more than we could have hoped for with your regular classes. But the council specifically requested you for this role. They believe you're uniquely qualified to handle the challenges we're going to face. Sarah opened the folder and scanned the species profiles inside. Tentacled aquilins with their collective consciousness and advanced mathematical abilities. Silicon-based crystalline entities who communicated through harmonic vibrations. Shape-shifting morphics whose very biology challenged traditional concepts of identity. Each species presented unique educational and social challenges. When do they arrive? Sarah asked. 6 weeks, which gives us just enough time to prepare our staff and selected students for what's coming. Are you willing to take this on? Sarah closed the folder and looked out the window at students heading to their afternoon classes. Human teenagers blissfully unaware that their school was about to become an unprecedented experiment in interspecies education. She thought about her own first encounters with alien species during the war. How terrifying and wonderful those moments had been when she realized how vast and diverse the galaxy truly was. I'll do it, she said. But I want to select the participating human students myself, and I want complete authority over the cultural integration protocols. Principal Williams nodded gratefully. Whatever you need. The success of this program could affect the future of human education throughout the galaxy. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah worked with xenobiologists and cultural anthropologists to develop integration strategies for each species. She studied communication protocols, dietary requirements, environmental needs, and social customs until she could recite them in her sleep. Most importantly, she carefully selected 12 human students who she believed could handle the challenges ahead. Marcus Thompson was an obvious choice. His natural curiosity and adaptability made him ideal for the program. Sarah also selected Emma Rodriguez, the purple-haired girl who had shown remarkable empathy in class discussions about alien perspectives. She chose students who had demonstrated not just academic ability, but emotional maturity and genuine interest in other cultures. The selected human students received intensive preparation, learning basic communication techniques for each species and studying their histories and social structures. Sarah was impressed by how seriously they took their responsibilities. These teenagers understood they weren't just students anymore. They were ambassadors for their entire species. The day of arrival was crisp and clear. Perfect weather for what Sarah hoped would be a historic moment. The alien students arrived via a specially modified transport that could accommodate their various environmental needs. Sarah stood in the school's main courtyard with her selected human students, all of them nervous but excited about what was to come. The first to emerge was Zephyr, a young Aquilan whose tentacles shifted colors as she moved, communicating emotional states through bioluminescent patterns. Her translator device rendered her thoughts into audible words, but Sarah could see the complex chromatic display that accompanied each phrase. The human students stared in fascination, and Sarah was pleased to see more curiosity than fear in their expressions. Next came Harmony, a crystalline being whose silicon-based body sang with soft musical tones as she moved. Her communication was entirely through harmonic vibrations that the translation equipment converted to speech, but the underlying melody remained audible. Several human students unconsciously swayed to her rhythm, already beginning to respond to this new form of expression. The morphic student, who had chosen the name River for easier human pronunciation, arrived in a form that resembled a teenage human but with subtle differences. Skin that seemed to flow like water and features that shifted slightly when no one was looking directly. The shapeshifter's ability to adapt their appearance was both fascinating and slightly unsettling. As each alien student was introduced to their human counterparts, Sarah watched the interactions carefully. There were awkward moments, certainly. Zephyr's tentacles accidentally knocked over a welcome banner. Harmony's harmonics set off several car alarms in the parking lot, and River reflexively mimicked the appearance of the first human they met, causing confusion about their identity. But there was also wonder, laughter, and the beginnings of genuine connection. "Welcome to Jefferson High School," Sarah addressed the mixed group of human and alien students. "Today begins an experiment that could change the future of education throughout the galaxy. You are pioneers, all of you, and the friendships you build here will help determine how our species interact for generations to come." Emma Rodriguez stepped forward, her purple hair even brighter than usual in the afternoon sunlight. "We're honored to have you here," she said, speaking directly to the alien students. "We hope you'll feel at home with us." Zephyr's tentacles flashed with warm golden colors as her translator conveyed her response. "We are excited to learn alongside humans. Your species' reputation for creativity and adaptability preceded you." Harmony's crystalline form chimed with what sounded like musical laughter. "Indeed, the songs of human achievement echo throughout the galaxy." River's form solidified into a more stable human appearance as they spoke. "We come not just to learn from your teachers, but to understand how human young ones grow and develop. Your educational methods are unlike anything in our experience." As the groups began to mingle and head toward the school building for orientation, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction mixed with anticipation. This was what she had fought for during all those years of war. Not just human survival, but humanity's rightful place as a bridge between species, a force for understanding and cooperation in a vast and diverse galaxy. The real work was just beginning. But watching her students, both human and alien, interact with curiosity and respect rather than fear and suspicion, Sarah knew she had found her true calling. She wasn't just preparing these young people for tests or graduation, she was preparing them to be citizens of the galaxy. The crisis came 3 weeks into the exchange program, and it started with something as simple as lunch period. Sarah was in her classroom preparing for afternoon lessons when her communicator buzzed with an emergency alert from the cafeteria. By the time she reached the scene, a crowd of students had gathered around what appeared to be a heated confrontation between human and alien students. At the center of the commotion, Marcus Thompson stood face to face with a hegemony student named Crix, who had arrived as part of a last-minute addition to the program. Sarah's blood ran cold when she saw the distinctive ridged features and metallic skin that had haunted her nightmares for 15 years. The hegemony, humanity's former enemies, had been included in the exchange as part of post-war reconciliation efforts, but Sarah hadn't been consulted about the decision. "You don't belong here," Marcus was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "My older brother died fighting your people. How can you just sit there eating lunch like nothing happened?" Crix's translator rendered his response in the flat, emotionless tone characteristic of hegemony speech patterns. "The war is over. The peace treaties have been signed. I am here to learn, not to fight." Sarah pushed through the crowd of students, her enhanced senses automatically assessing the situation for potential threats. Other alien students were backing away from the confrontation, their various forms of body language expressing anxiety and confusion. The human students were divided. some supporting Marcus, others looking uncomfortable with his aggressive stance. This was exactly the kind of incident that could destroy the entire program. "Everyone back to your normal activities," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the authority that had once moved battleships. The crowd dispersed immediately, but Marcus and Crix remained locked in their standoff. Sarah positioned herself between them, close enough to intervene physically if necessary. "Marcus, I need you to step back and take some deep breaths," she said calmly. "Crix, please remain where you are for a moment." Marcus's face was flushed with emotion. "Ms. Chen, you of all people should understand. You fought against them. You know what they did to us." Sarah felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. The remaining students, both human and alien, were watching to see how she would handle this moment. Her next words would either diffuse the situation or potentially escalate it into something that could end the exchange program permanently. "You're right, Marcus. I did fight against the hegemony. I lost friends to their weapons, watched human colonies burn under their attacks. For 15 years, beings like Crix were my enemies." She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. But that war ended because people on both sides realized that continued fighting would destroy everyone. The question isn't whether we have reasons to hate each other. The question is whether we're going to let that hatred define our future. She turned to address Crix directly. "Your people caused tremendous pain to humanity. That's a fact that can't be ignored or forgotten. But you weren't responsible for those decisions, were you? How old were you when the war began?" Crix's metallic features shifted in what Sarah recognized as the hegemony equivalent of uncertain embarrassment. "I was newly hatched." 3 of your years old?" "A child," Sarah said, looking back at Marcus. "Just like you were. Neither of you chose to be enemies." She gestured to encompass the mixed group of students still listening. "But all of you get to choose what happens next." Marcus's anger was wavering, replaced by confusion and something that might have been shame. "But how can we just forget what happened? How can we pretend it doesn't matter?" "We don't forget," Sarah replied firmly. "We remember so we can do better. Marcus, your brother's sacrifice meant something. He died so that humanity could survive and eventually find peace. If we can't learn to coexist with former enemies, then what was his sacrifice for?" She moved closer to Marcus, lowering her voice but still speaking loud enough for others to hear. "I know this is hard. When I first saw Crix in the program roster, my first instinct was to refuse to allow him in my school. Do you know what changed my mind?" Marcus shook his head silently. "I realized that teaching a former enemy to understand and respect human values is probably the most important thing I could do to prevent future wars. Crix is going to return to his people with stories about humans, with friendships and experiences that will influence how his generation views us. That's more powerful than any weapon I ever used in combat." She turned back to Crix, whose metallic skin had taken on a slightly different hue. What Sarah knew from her military experience was the hegemony expression of deep thought. "Crix, I want you to understand something. The pain that Marcus feels is real and justified. Your people's actions during the war caused suffering that still echoes through human families today. If you want to be part of this program, you need to acknowledge that pain and work to earn the trust and respect of your human classmates." Crix's posture shifted into what Sarah recognized as a formal stance of acknowledgement. "I understand, Commander Chen. I did not come here to ignore the past, but to learn from it. I wish to understand how humans have found the strength to choose peace despite their pain." The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. Emma Rodriguez stepped forward, her purple hair bright under the cafeteria lights. "Maybe we could all learn from each other," she said quietly. "I mean, we're all here because we want to understand different perspectives, right? That includes understanding how to move past conflicts." Other students began to nod, and Sarah felt some of the tension in the air beginning to dissipate. But she knew this was just the beginning of a much larger challenge. "All right, everyone," she said, addressing the mixed group of human and alien students. "I think it's time for an impromptu lesson. We're going to talk about something that wasn't in any of our prepared curriculum: how to build understanding between former enemies." Over the next hour, what had started as a potential program-ending crisis transformed into one of the most powerful learning experiences Sarah had ever facilitated. Students from multiple species shared stories about conflicts in their own histories, discussing how their civilizations had learned to move beyond past grievances. The Aquilan student Zephyr described her people's ancient wars with a neighboring species that had eventually become their closest allies. Harmony sang a crystalline song about forgiveness that reduced several students to tears. Marcus and Crix didn't become friends that day, but they did begin to talk to each other as individuals rather than representatives of their species. Sarah watched them carefully, seeing the first tentative steps toward understanding that could eventually become something stronger. As the students gradually dispersed to their afternoon classes, Principal Williams appeared at Sarah's side. "I heard about what happened," he said quietly. "The district office is concerned about potential backlash from parents. Some people think including hegemony students in the program was a mistake." Sarah looked out at the courtyard where human and alien students were walking together, their conversations animated and friendly, despite the earlier tension. Maybe it was a mistake to include them without more preparation, she admitted. But now that they're here, sending them away would send exactly the wrong message. It would tell everyone that reconciliation is only possible when it's easy and comfortable. And if more incidents like this happen, Sarah smiled grimly, then we'll handle them the same way we handled this one. By talking, listening, and remembering that the goal isn't to forget the past, but to build a better future. Besides, she added, watching Marcus and Crix walking in the same direction, though not quite together, I think our students are stronger and more capable than we sometimes give them credit for. That evening, Sarah stood in her empty classroom reflecting on the day's events. The crisis had revealed something important about both herself and her students. They were all capable of growth, of moving beyond the limitations imposed by history and pain. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges ahead. But today had proven that understanding between former enemies was possible. For the first time since the war ended, Sarah felt truly hopeful about the future of interspecies relations, and she knew that her real work as an educator was just beginning. 6 months later, Sarah stood before the Interspecies Council in Geneva, delivering her final report on the Jefferson High School exchange program. The vast amphitheater held representatives from dozens of species, their various forms creating a tapestry of diversity that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. As she spoke, real-time translators converted her words into the languages, harmonics, color patterns, and pheromone releases that each species used for communication. The program exceeded all expectations, Sarah reported, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Not only did we achieve our educational goals, but we discovered that young minds are far more adaptable and open to interspecies friendship than most adult populations. The students didn't just learn about each other's cultures, they created new forms of collaboration that their teachers never anticipated. Behind her, holographic displays showed scenes from the past semester, human and aquiline students working together on a marine biology project, their different perspectives on water-based ecosystems leading to breakthrough insights. Crystalline and human musicians composing songs that incorporated both harmonic and melodic elements, creating entirely new art forms. The morphic student River teaching human classmates about identity and self-expression, while learning about human concepts of individuality and personal growth. Perhaps most significantly, Sarah continued, the program demonstrated that even former enemies can find common ground when they focus on shared goals rather than past conflicts. Marcus Thompson and Crix from the Hegemony Collective became close friends and study partners. Their joint presentation on conflict resolution strategies is now being studied by diplomatic corps throughout the galaxy. She paused as the assembled representatives reacted to this news. The relationship between humans and the hegemony had been one of the most closely watched aspects of the program, and its success had implications far beyond education. Ambassador Veltar of the Aquiline Federation spoke first, her tentacles shifting through colors that indicated deep approval. Commander Chen, the success of your program has already inspired similar initiatives on 7 worlds. How do you recommend we scale these methods to accommodate the diverse educational systems throughout the galaxy? Sarah had been preparing for this question for weeks. The key isn't to impose a uniform system, but to establish principles that can be adapted to local cultures and needs. Every species learns differently, but curiosity, empathy, and collaborative problem-solving are universal concepts. We need to train educators who understand these principles and can apply them flexibly. The crystalline representative, Elder Resonance, sang a question that Sarah's translator rendered as, "What of the resistance we encounter from populations still harboring resentments from past conflicts?" "We start with the young," Sarah replied without hesitation. Children and adolescents haven't yet solidified their prejudices. They're naturally curious about differences rather than threatened by them. As they grow into adulthood carrying positive interspecies relationships, they become advocates for continued cooperation within their own communities. She gestured to the display, which now showed footage from the program's graduation ceremony. Human and alien students stood together, many of them tearfully saying goodbye to friends they might not see again for years. But Sarah knew they would maintain contact through the galactic communication networks, and those friendships would influence their decisions and attitudes throughout their lives. "I have one final recommendation," Sarah said, as her presentation neared its conclusion. "We should establish a permanent interspecies educational council with authority to develop curriculum standards, train educators, and coordinate exchange programs. But this council shouldn't be dominated by government officials or military personnel. It should be led by teachers, students, and families, the people who actually live with the consequences of our educational choices." The chamber buzzed with conversation as representatives discussed this proposal. Sarah had expected resistance to the idea of reducing government control over such an important initiative, but the success of her program had given her significant influence with the council. Ambassador Veltar raised another question. "Commander Chen, are you willing to lead such an organization? Your experience and results speak for themselves." Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety that came with new challenges. "I appreciate the confidence, but I think my role should be temporary. I can help establish the organization and train its initial leadership, but the ultimate goal should be to transfer authority to educators who represent all species equally. My human perspective, valuable as it may be, shouldn't dominate such an important galactic institution." After the formal session ended, Sarah found herself surrounded by representatives eager to discuss implementation details. The enthusiasm was gratifying, but she felt somewhat overwhelmed by the scope of what she'd set in motion. What had started as a simple attempt to find purpose after the war had somehow evolved into a galactic educational revolution. Later that evening, back in her hotel room, Sarah received a video call from Jefferson High School. Principal Williams appeared on her screen, beaming with excitement. "Sarah, you should see this place," he said, panning his camera to show the school's main courtyard. "We've got application requests from 47 species wanting to send students here next year. The district has approved funding for a massive expansion, and 3 other schools in the system want to start their own exchange programs." "That's wonderful news," Sarah replied, though part of her felt concerned about managing such rapid growth. "Are you confident you can maintain quality while expanding so quickly?" "That's actually why I'm calling. We want you to come back and help us build a proper training program for teachers, not just at Jefferson, but throughout the Earth Alliance educational system." The council was right. "We need someone with your experience to make sure we do this correctly." Sarah looked out her hotel window at the lights of Geneva below, thinking about the choice ahead of her. She could accept the Interspecies Council position and help shape galactic education policy from the highest levels, or she could return to Jefferson High School and continue working directly with students and teachers, building understanding one classroom at a time. The decision was easier than she'd expected. "Send me the details about the training program," she said. "I'll be home next week." "Home," Principal Williams repeated with a smile. "I'm glad you think of it that way. The students have been asking when their favorite teacher is coming back. They have some ideas for next year's curriculum that I think will surprise you." After ending the call, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 2 years ago, she'd been a displaced soldier with no idea how to function in civilian society. Now she was helping to shape the future of interspecies relations through education. The transformation felt both dramatic and completely natural. Her communicator chimed with a message from Marcus Thompson, now in his senior year at Jefferson High. The text was simple but powerful. "Ms. Chen, Crix and I wanted you to know that we're both planning to study diplomatic relations in college. We want to work together to prevent the kind of conflicts that our species experienced. Thank you for showing us that former enemies can become allies when they focus on building something better together." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with galactic recognition or professional advancement. This was what victory looked like. Not the destruction of enemies, but the transformation of enmity into understanding. She had fought wars across worlds to protect humanity's future. But her real contribution to that future had been discovered in the classrooms and corridors of a single high school. The next morning, as she prepared to return to Earth, Sarah Chen knew exactly who she was and what her mission would be for the years ahead. She wasn't just a former commander or a teacher or an educational innovator. She was a bridge builder, helping young minds span the gaps between species and cultures, and there was no battlefield she would rather claim as her own. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but the most important discoveries were happening in the hearts and minds of students who were learning to see differences, not as threats to be eliminated, but as opportunities to grow stronger together. Sarah had finally found her true calling, and it felt like coming home.